Hi, I am Mike. I will be your host for today. I am a new PhD student from a Jiao lab in Monash, Chuyin.
My name is Chuyin, and I'm a PhD student from the same lab as well. And Vishaal.
My name is Vishaal, and I'm a master student from same lab as well.
All right. Today we will be talking about a paper on the topic of sensory motor processing. Now, the classical view on sensory motor processing is essentially that there is a sensory component in the brain. It picks up these senses, and then there's some kind of translation process in between, and then it leads to action executed by a motor component. Now, based on this classical view, we can see that it's a very one direction, right? And each component are sort of separated from the other. Sensory components sort of have some influence on the motor execution, of course, but the influence is indirect due to the translation process required in between. And the motor component at the end of this chain, of course, have no effect on the sensory component. But is this picture of sensory motor processing correct? Well, theories such as embodied cognition would disagree. Embodied cognition argued that our action is guided by our senses, true, and at the same time, what we perceive is also in some sense determined by our actions. For example, if you are thinking about like a situation where you cross the road, before you cross the road, you look around on both sides of the road to see if there's a car coming. What are you doing there is essentially you're actively seeking out cars in your environment by turning your head left and turning your head right. By executing these motor movements, it enabled you to seek out these objects in your environment and eventually leads you to either walking through this crosswalk or stopping, right? Leads to certain actions. Now, the question, of course, is whether this embodied cognition view, which proposed a intimate connection between action and sensory, are correct. The author of this paper argued that if such views are correct, perhaps there is a functional brain area that processes both sensory input and motor output at the same time, rather than an individual area that processes sensory and the other individual area that processes motor output. But how are we going to find out? Well, the author designed a EEG experiment accompanied by a modified Stroop task. I hope we all know what the Stroop task is. You know, when the word of one color is presented in the color of a different color. Well, perhaps that's not the best explanation. But let's say you see the word red come on screen, but the word itself is in the color blue. That is a classic Stroop task. In this case, there's also an auditory component. When you see the word, there is a voice pronouncing the name of a color, for example, yellow, right? And the participant is asked to respond based on these aspects. Now, the EEG recording of this Stroop task, um, it well, as an EEG recording, it has limited temporal resolution. And one way to sort of overcome this is by conducting an independent component analysis. It's essentially breaking the wave picked up by the EEG back down into their independent sources of the brain activities that made up of this final result. Um, the author essentially break the entire EEG data into a lot of individual components, and then they separate each into four groups. the sensory group, the motor group, the sensorimotor group, and the unspecified groups. For a component to be in the sensory group, they need to show certain level of activities during the sensory period. So between the onset of the stimuli but before the onset of the motor movement. If the components show high activities in this period, they will be classified as a sensory component. On the other hand, if the component only show high activities during the period that's after the motor movement, but before the end of the trial, that will be considered as a motor component. If a component have high activities in both, they are the sensorimotor component. And they also suggest that these components may be playing a role where they process both the sensory input and the motor output, as theories such as embodied cognition would have suggested. And of course, if you have low activities in both, then the component is unspecified. It probably don't have much to do with either sensory or motor processing. Now, not only that, in fact, the author was also able to localize these findings back into the brain areas, right? They can make an educated estimation on what corresponding brain area these components would have. And there seems to be 3 clusters based on their analysis. There's a cluster, so activities, sensory motor activities, in the anterior cingulate cortex, in the precuneus area, as well as in the left Brodmann area. There's these 3 areas seems to be playing some sort of roles in processing both the sensory input and the motor outputs. The result of the studies, other than these areas, be able to identify these areas, are a little bit inconclusive because the author found a set of sensory motor components, true, but they also found large groups of both motor-only component and sensory-only component, which seems to be painting a much more complex picture than either the classical view or the embodied cognition view would have suggested. So that's the end of my summary. Anything to add? Anything I have made a mistake on?
No, that was a pretty good summary, I think. Right? Just summed up everything. Yeah.
Yes, I think covers all the important results and analysis. Yes.
Yeah. Without going into the details, which is quite a lot, if I'm being honest.
I can't understand details about localization of those sensory motor ICs.
Yeah, it's very technical. Yeah, for sure.
On that topic, I think the author has made a point when discussing the 3 area, especially the second cluster, so the left Brodmann area. They were saying that it seems that all the participants are using their right hand to make the motor response, pressing the keyboard. But they said that this cannot be the only reason why the left side of the Brodmann area light up, because it's supposed to process both sensory and motor information, and the sensory information is fixed in the center of the screen. But I kind of disagree with that, because I feel like, sorry?
Why? So you were gonna say, sorry.
Oh, yeah. I kind of disagree with that, in the sense that I feel like the Stroop task is an inhibition task, right? So before the participant had made their motor movement, something in the motor areas are inhibiting them from making a premature motor movement, I think. So perhaps it's not surprising that the left Brahman area light up even during the sensory period. So between the onset of stimuli, but before the onset of movement. That would, rather than saying that this is the result of both processing sensory input and motor output, may just be a motor inhibition area instead.
I mean, with the
You mean the left side?
Yes.
Yeah. So they specify those areas are specifically the somatosensory cortex and primary motor cortex and everything. I forgot the exact difference in function between the premotor area and the supplemental motor area. Okay. But I think one of those is related to Brodmann 5, 6. I don't Brodmann 6, which is what they mentioned they saw one of the clusters in as well. I think that's also related to, I think if I'm not wrong, I could be wrong because it's been so long since I did this, but it shows activity even when you think about the task planning, right? If you do task planning, right, it also lights up. So I think yes, the Shroop task is a matter of inhibition and inattention and everything, right? Executive control but when you plan to hit or don't hit the yes, no, right? I think those areas it's only natural to have a cluster um of activity in that area, I think. Yeah. But again, this is from my rusty and limited knowledge of biopsych.
Yeah, I just don't think their methods are, well, I mean, there are room for confusion, I guess. Because as you have said, it could just be the supplemental motor area that's activating during the so-called sensory period.
Yeah.
And they consider it as some sort of sensory motor processing simultaneously, but that's not the case.
Yeah. Oh, if it's a premotor or supplementary motor area, I think both those areas are associated with Brodmann 6, but I think one of it gets activated if one of it gets activated when you plan during task planning. So yeah.
I suppose an easy way to see if that's the case is just you find the left-handed participant, and if suddenly the right motor, the right
I
area
mean, yeah. In the discussion, they also say that the independent component analysis could have failed to separate sensory and motor sources. But I don't think they dived too much into why, right? Did they, or did I miss that?
I think there is a passage. So if you're increasing the number of channels, you
Yeah,
get
yes,
more
yes.
components,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But by increasing the channel from 64 to 127,
It won't
they
make
could
much of a
not,
difference.
yeah, it wouldn't make a difference
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
sensory motor.
Right.
So they are saying that these are real, these not misidentified, right?
Right. Okay, yeah.
I think.
Yeah, regarding of the role of channel numbers, I see the authors emphasize it or mention this issue multiple times, but I don't really get why this issue matters. So they are saying like, see, I can't find it. It's kind of like reach the maximal information.
Right, correct. Yeah. So after a certain point, you don't need that many electrodes, I think. But this requires, I think, a bit of prior reading, right? I think there's a paper by Lau and colleagues, I think. There's a 2012 paper, which they cited how many electrodes are really needed for EEG, mobile brain imaging. And I think they used that as they didn't really use it. They said that it's an agreement. Like the fact that they found that from 64 to 127, there's not much of a difference in recording. As it's like aligns with previous findings.
Yeah, but the authors also, I mean, the authors of this paper also said for some studies or for some field, and it might play a role. I mean, the number of channels might play a role in
Right.
the results. Mm,
I was under the impression is more related to like I suppose the sensitivity of the EEG methods. If you have like 32 electrodes, you have less components, which means that some of the components that can be separated into either sensory or motor, is now squished into a sensory motor component.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
but that's not the case, right?
Well, they are saying that it's not the case, at least from 64 to 127 channels.
No, I mean they have a table one, right? The
Uh,
sensorimotor and independent components are basically the same for 32, 64, and 127.
have a look.
The changes were only at sensory only axis or motor only axis.
One.
Table one, yeah. You see, it's all 5.8 for sensory motor axis.
Ah, ah, I see. I mean, yeah, you're right.
Or
5.8.
yeah, I found what the author said. The author says more unconstrained human behaviors and would likely benefit from a higher number of EEG channels. What are these unconstrained human behaviors?
Mm,
Mm,
I assume I'm thinking more about sports, I guess. In a more complex environment where you need to respond to more stimuli and make more complex movement other than
okay.
just hitting keyboard. Maybe
Ah,
that's the case.
so it's like more information, then it will exceed the maximal amount of information that a certain number of channels can capture. Something like that. Mm,
Or maybe more brain area will need to get involved in the simultaneous processing.
I
And that
see.
would increase the components found, so on and so forth.
Mm. Okay, it's kind of anti-intuition. Yeah.
Is it though? What's the intuition?
Mm. More channels, more information.
Much.
Uh,
I mean, but okay, but what happens when information is so saturated, right? Um, let's like you say more channel, more information, and then like what if like the increments it's so small? I'm not sure if I'm using the right words, but it's like
Or say more
never mind,
channels,
forget it.
more.
I don't know how to formulate my thoughts.
Maybe my wording is not appropriate. Or say
Yeah.
more channels, more accuracy, more accuracy. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm, right. I see. Anyway,
um,
the authors mentioned it a few times, so I assume this is an important issue to the readers or to them. Yeah. Mm, anyway, we can go ahead and to some other questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
um, oh, sorry, you have something?
No, you can go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to quickly discuss the implication of the study. I mean, uh, maybe I didn't get the point of the study, but it feels to me almost a little bit self-evident. The
Self-evident.
result of the study is a bit self-evident. right? If you think about it, okay, there probably is an area that's specifically processing motor information. There probably is an area that's specific processing sensory information, and there's some sort of in-between area. That's just the classical view, right? And this is exactly showing sort of
Yeah.
this classical view, I think.
This is also my question. I was about to ask that. So it's about the whole logic of this hypothesis testing in the paper. So if you go back to the introduction section and see how they interpret the two views, the author said the classical view the prediction of classical view is where is it? Yeah, the classical view in its pure form leads to the hypothesis that the activity of functional models is strictly related
Yeah.
to either sensory stimulation or motor response, but not to both.
Right.
And the other view, it's saying it can it's a holistic process and can have both functions. Where is it? But anyway, it mentioned both or some where is it? Oh yes, right after it. Will
So
relate to both sensory stimulation and motor response.
right,
Yeah, some functional models. So it's
right,
none versus some. So I would say as long as we find some models that have both sensory and motor functions, we can. I mean, the evidence is supporting the alternative view. But in the discussion section, the authors also said we cannot reject. I mean, we cannot. I can't find the exact text, but they said we cannot reject the classical view because not all modules show both functions. I was very confused about this whole logic. Yeah, because from their results, it should mean that the main evidence is supporting the alternative view because the sensory motor modules are quite common. Yeah.
I feel like I mean it, they are in the beginning when they are talking about classical view, they are talking in a sense that's too strict. It's probably more like from how I understand it, it would be more like there's a big sensory part, there's a big motor part, and there's a small in between parts, some sort of sensory motor communication, integration, translation, whatever it is. And on the other side, the embodied cognition view would say this area in the middle is actually the majority. And maybe there are some small areas that's individually for sensory and for motor execution. That would be my understanding about it. And the current result seems to, what does this show? I mean,
It's kind of like yeah, I think one way is to think about it as if I can use consciousness as an analogy, we say the minimal structure required to have consciousness. So that minimal structure might be responsible for multiple functions. Yeah, within generating consciousness. So this, I'm guessing we can understand this. We might be able to understand this sensory motor modules as the minimal. I mean, the core structure of doing this task. And the other sensory only or motor only modules might be some extensive functions or so. This is a potential way to understand it. Yeah. I understand it's in reality it's not possible to see, I mean, say all the modules are sensory motor for the alternative view, or all the modules are sensory only or motor only modules for the classical view. That's not very possible in reality. So yeah.
Yeah.
Does it make any sense to Mike?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Actually, on the topic of consciousness, if I may, to go off track a little bit, I chose this paper largely because I have been reading a little bit about the inactive account of consciousness, which essentially describes your body's perception and action as something special in a way. It's like your medium of how your mind can interact with the world, and there's a special role in consciousness, well, according to this account. I'm kind of curious on other people's opinions about it. If there is any comments at all.
Right. What is the question exactly?
Yeah, what's the question exactly?
Oh, it's not exactly a question. It's more like, do we think this is a viable way of approaching consciousness
I
study?
mean, okay, if I were to summarize the two contrasting hypotheses in a nutshell, right, or the two contrasting views, is that one hypothesis says that they're both independent, right, sensation and motor processing. Another one is it's basically in tandem, right, working together, right, and the results in this shows that basically it is working. There's activity in both at the same time, right? Um, First of all, it's correlational, right? First of all, it's correlational, so it doesn't mean it doesn't mean causation. Second of all, in relation to consciousness, it doesn't really. I wouldn't say it highlights something new. It basically just clarifies the mechanism of sensory motor processing. That's it. So I feel like this paper, I mean, to me, I feel like this paper clarifies how sensory motor processing works, right? And it's a EEG correlates its underlying correlates, right? But in terms of consciousness, it doesn't really explain anything phenomenologically, if that makes sense.
But okay, put it this way, perhaps it's easier to describe with an example. So most of our conscious visual experience are perceived while we are moving our body. We rarely stay very still, right? Even
Yeah.
your eyes move from one position to another, your heads move, your body moves. You're always in some kind of movement in most cases. In a psychophysical studies, the participants are required to focus their eye on a specific spot, to not move their eye in most cases. And of course, they are probably not like running while doing the psychophysics studies. Would Are we missing an important component of qualia by restricting all our experiment in this motionless, fixed environment?
So are you saying, for example, we see something while we sit there? It's quite different from when we see something while we are running?
Yes, for example.
Hmm.
Especially things like perception of space, right? I assume that.
But how does it again? I'm sorry. How does it tie that again to this paper?
Oh, it's why I chose this paper.
Oh, it's why. Okay, right. Okay,
Yes.
right. All right. Just clarifying. Sorry, I
Yeah,
mixed it.
we're going a little bit off track.
Right.
I
Okay.
see what you mean. Yeah, in
Yeah.
terms of functions, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's an important functional part of consciousness. Yes.
I guess yes. Yeah. Imagine if you can isolate the activity of sensory processing and then motor processing. Can you have two independent, two distinct experiences, like completely nullifying one and then now we're theory crafting, right? Now we're just theorizing and going completely off topic. But imagine, but no, this paper does show that they both work somewhat together, right?
It reminds me of the student from Sydney who gives a study who gives a talk about his study
Oh.
on VR
Yeah.
and visual experience. I mean, it's similar to visual experience under some body movement. Yeah, because they are
Yeah.
walking. The participants are walking
Mhm.
while wearing VR, and the task is about their visual experience. Yeah.
Yep.
But I can't remember any details. But yeah, but the idea is quite close. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
Right.
mm.
And I would say it's sort of counterintuitive in some way. Do you imagine that if you are observing color, a color patch, while you are not moving, and while you are moving, should have the same experience, right? Same color, I mean, at least intuitively. Um, but it would be interesting if there is actually some sort of phenomenal difference that you can find through similarities. But now I'm just throwing out ideas now.
Mm.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it hard to say. I would guess it might also relate to other cognitive functions like attention. While we are moving, our attention might be distracted, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's kind of thing.
And maybe more naturalistic stimuli is required to make the whole thing work. Uh, just to quickly come back to the paper as well. I guess it's kind of interesting if there are specific brain areas that are responsible for both sensory and motor output. Um, does that mean that, when we are talking about qualia, we are often talking about sensory experience only? Uh, does that suggest anything about the nature of qualia, that there must be some sort of motor components?
Sorry, are you saying?
So if some areas are processing both the sensory and the motor output, and assuming that some neurons, whatever they are involved in creating this vivid experience of qualia, right?
It's possible, yeah, of course it's possible, yeah.
That does that mean that there is a motor component to qualia?
I mean, no, because I mean, I don't know.
Multiple
I mean,
component qualia. That's
Motor component.
more.
a
Hmm.
movement aspect to
Probably
qualia.
not, because your motor components are basically just in response to things, to input, right?
Yeah,
Like
the
it
change
doesn't do
of.
anything to your experience. Yeah, it doesn't do anything to your experience, but it's like you responding to experience, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, so say if you have you look at your computer screen and the square, not square, say an image of a building is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, say zooming in, you feel like it's moving towards you. It's I'm not sure if it can be called illusion, but it's just our experience, yeah, of movement. Yeah.
Mm.
And also
Hmm.
it's structurally like this, say, and we have some cells. I mean I can't repeat what the lecture said in my bachelor course. It's about how to detect the movement, and in our I mean the neurons, how to detect the movement, and uh yeah. Never mind. I can't remember exactly, but yes, I say the structure and way of doing it, it's quite similar to say when we see an image zooming in, and we feel like they are moving.
Oh
Mm.
yeah, that's like an illusion of
Mm, but But yeah, when you are actually moving, your physiological status will also change. Say your heart rate, your body temperature, or some kind of feelings from your skin. And that sort of information might also contribute to our qualia, to our actual qualia when we are actually moving. Yeah.
That's true. Any other questions related to this paper?
Not from me, no. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm good, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that's all from me as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I don't really have too much else to discuss, to be honest. Well, I guess that's it then. That's the end of this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes.